Welcome everyone to this World Investment Forum satellite event. We're very pleased to have with us a very large and prestigious panel and a number of participants. We've had over 300 people register for this event. People are continuing to join, but we have such a full schedule. We will dive directly into it. And with that, I'd like to introduce Paul Clement Hunt, the former head of UNEP-FI, the current CEO of Blended Capital. Paul, please take it away.
Excellencies, honored guests, ladies and gentlemen, delighted to welcome you to the concluding session of the Beyond COVID-19, Rebuilding SDG Aligned Investment and Business. We had a fascinating session this morning at the other part of the world, starting in Tokyo, working through Australia, parts of Africa. So again, it's great to be with you again today. Let me set the frame and then pass over to the opening speakers. So this process began really in March of 2020, when a group of business people, entrepreneurs, were working with the UN in South Africa and towards a fundraising effort for the COVID-19 pandemic, again with the UN in South Africa. Out of that, the question came about, which was, how will business and investment both mitigate the impacts of this dreadful health crisis, and then beyond that, how will business help rebuild? So 8 months into the conversation, this is our concluding event. We have a truly multinational set of panelists from business, from investment, from public policy. We thank UNCTAD for hosting today. And we will be taking forward recommendations to the UN World Investment Forum in Abu Dhabi, which convenes in October 2021. And they will be under the banner of the Waterberg Declaration. Now, with no further ado, we have a tight schedule. We have plenty of experience from different continents. So I'd like to kick off, and I'm just going to ask whether Dr. James Zahn from UNCTAD is with us, or will he be joining a couple of minutes late?
He's going to be a couple of minutes late. So
okay, thank you for that. So with that, I'm going to go straight to one of the driving forces and the anchor for this whole process, Judge Professor Mervyn King from South Africa. And then he will be followed by his co-convener, in many ways, Professor Paul Watchman from the UK. And they will give their own comments in terms of why we need a positive pathway to reimagine business and investment, to reimagine development, to reimagine how we bring the power of capital markets and finance to not just the G7 or the G20 or the OECD countries, but also to the last mile communities and the last mile entrepreneurs, and what this complex process requires, how we become aligned with the SDGs. Judge Professor Mervyn King, it's over to you for the first 7 minutes, and thank you for your leadership in this event.
Thank you very much. I want to start with saying that 2020, although a dire year in many ways, was the year where SDG 17 collaboration came to the fore, because we saw countries collaborating and racing to get a vaccine, which will be the ultimate herd immunity for this virus. And Ocean Termer, the financial analytics company, who started in 1970, started to analyze how the market capitalization of companies listed on great stock exchanges was made up. And they came to the conclusion, informed conclusion, that at that stage, it was 80% in 1970 was made up of additives in a balance sheet, according to financial reporting standards. But by the late 80s, early 90s, it was turned around. It was about 75% was in financial reporting standards, additives in a balance sheet, and 25% were what we then called sustainability issues. Today we would call ESG issues. And at the end of 2020, they've kept analyzing it. it was shown that only 10% of iconic companies listed on the S&P 500 was made up, 10% of its market cap was made up of additives in a balance sheet according to US GAAP, United States Generally Accepted Accounting Principles. The rest was made up of what was called non-financial assets, an unfortunate nomenclature because they all have eventually financial outcomes. The consequence of all this, that as chairman of the IRC some 5 years ago, I noticed that other framework providers had entered the ESG space because it was becoming more and more important. But this was leading to clutter and confusion for preparers and users, and a dilution of comparability for investment purposes. And so the corporate reporting dialogue was formed at the IRC, and I invited these framework providers to try and get them to agree to harmonize their standards. It was unfortunately not very successful. And in March 2019 in London, there was an international conference at which the executives of all members of what I call the alphabet soup, CDP, CDSB, TCFD, GRI, SASB, etc., were all present in the room, FASB, IFRS, IASB, etc., were all present in the room. And I took the opportunity to say that, in my view, it was a social outrage that these framework providers looked upon themselves as competitors, and where they're all dealing with public interest issues, namely ESG issues, and all striving for the same public good outcome, to make reporting more informed and therefore accountability more informed, because reporting is the lifeblood of accountability. I'm told that calling it a social outrage and pointing out that they were all fishing from the same social pond started galvanizing some of these leaders into action. And it really came to a head in 2020 when CDSB, CDP, IRC, SASB, and the GRI issued a statement of intent to collaborate under SDG 17 and try to harmonize their standards. In doing so, it inevitably led to the question of the discussion of merger, and SASB and the IRC merged, and we have formed the Value Reporting Foundation, which is a new body. But the new body points out, and I point out to all of you, that sustainability has two sides to it. I was the chairman, now chairman emeritus of the GRI, so I speak on an informed basis when I say from 1997, the GRI standards looked through a civil society lens and looked at what were the impacts of the activities of a company and its product on the three critical dimensions for sustainable development: the economy, society, and the environment. The other side is, of course, the economy, society, and the environment impacts on the financial condition, the operating performance, and the risk profile of companies, or put in accounting terms, the balance sheet, the income statement, cash flows, and the cost of capital. And what has been discussed now is that the IFRS, International Financial Reporting Standards Board, has issued a consultation paper which closed on the 31st of December, so not even a month ago. But I'm reliably informed that the overwhelming opinion is that the IFRS should extend its mandate not only for financial reporting, but to include a mandate of sustainability reporting, and to get these standards harmonized so we will have one standard of international sustainability standards, an International Sustainability Standards Board, under the oversight of the IFRS, whose financial standards are operative in 144 countries, and they deal with the regulators in 144 countries. So it is interesting that the way business needs to be conducted today is a board has to apply its collective mind as to what are the SDGs pertinent to the business of the company. and how they're being incorporated into the business model, and how are they dealt with in the activities of the company in producing its product or rendering its service. But likewise, it's absolutely essential for then reporting so that stakeholders and the providers of capital, of course, can actually understand what is happening in the company and can make an informed assessment as to whether they or beneficiaries, if they're trustees of a pension fund or directors of a financial institution, should remain invested in the equity of that company. So there are huge movements, and I speak speculatively that I believe over the next 2 years we will have an international sustainability standards board, and we'll be able to then take ESG issues and compare them from company to company, compare BP with Shell, for example, one using GRI, the other using SASB, really compare them, and of course have our reporting more informed and therefore improved accountability. Thank you, Paul.
Professor King, thank you for those opening comments. And let me bridge. I see that Dr. James Zahn from UNCTAD has come to the party. James, welcome. I'll come to you in a minute. So we're going from Professor King to the UN. But let me bridge in this way. As Mervyn describes it, we have this alphabet soup of organizations and institutions and standards, which for me reflects a complex global system, a complex global architecture where we need to align things. We know that. Part of the challenge of these sessions is that we're trying to bridge from those systems, those standards, those things embedded in the business we do, from capital markets through to the last mile. For such a complicated, clever, sophisticated system, we still leave more than 2 billion people behind. And in COVID-19, in the tragedy of COVID-19, one of the questions to us all is, how do we take the complexity there? How do we connect money and capital to the last mile? And how do we make it flow and truly leave no one behind? So again, Judge Professor King, thank you for your leadership and your opening comments, giving us that idea of complexity, but alignment and a positive story. So I will now ask our host, Dr. James Zahn, who is the Senior Director, Investment and Enterprise for the UN Conference on Trade and Development. So James, the floor is yours for 7 minutes, and then we'll go to Professor Watchman. James, thank you very much for your support.
Thank you very much, Paul. Thank you for taking the lead and then organizing this event. And in fact, this is a series of events over the past 8 months. You have been taking the leadership in organizing that and leading to the UN and for policy impact. Really appreciate that. We are grateful for you, to you and to your team. It seems you are still doing the UN job. My apologies for being late. I just walked out of the Davos meeting and to this one. It seems that competition is going on. This one is also very competitive. Paul, as in the morning I said, I already talked about the challenges in this sustainable investment, and listening carefully in the morning session, and particularly listening to the keynote speakers, to Professor King and to Watchman and to others. I feel that it is very important to clarify a concept. I think you have been emphasizing throughout the discussion in the morning and now even to say the challenge is how to connect the capital markets to the last miles community and entrepreneurs. So that is the key issue. And then at this stage, over the past years, I've seen the kind of a parallel discussion, the two sets of issues which are interrelated, but they are separate. One conversation is about ESG. The other conversation is about investing in SDG sectors. These are interrelated, but a bit of separate. I would say that this is like issues of financing versus investment, all that responsibility versus contribution. So ESG issue is more of a responsibility issue, that to see that due diligence is required before you select financing of investment projects. So that's financing. So the concept of investment chain is very important, and to look at upstream and the downstream. Upstream is financing, and ESG is very important. But downstream, meaning that you need to get the pool of all these funds, be it kind of green fund, social bonds, green bonds, private equity that designated to SDGs. And that's a pool, that's a reservoir. And then we need kind of a channel. So channel is to the SDG sectors on the ground to generate impact. So this is kind of a chain. The process is mobilizing, that is upstream. ESG is very important. And then channeling, that we need to link to direct investors. That is multinational companies and domestic companies. And then try to work together to make the impact on the ground. That is the conversation I think we need to make it clear. So sometimes the word investing SDGs is confused with the financing of SDGs. These two are different. So that's why in our World Investment Report last year, we try to differentiate the two and to quantify that. So to see that for SDG or sustainable investment, sustainable dedicated funds, that is about $1.4 trillion US roughly, and that consists of 900 billion of equity funds, mutual funds in particular, and 260 billion of green bonds and over 100 billion of social bonds. And these are the funds specifically finance sustainable investment projects. And then we have another, perhaps about 29 trillion US that is, we call it sustainable responsible funds, meaning these are more ESG funds that they do the due diligence to avoid investing in those sectors which are not sustainable development related. So that's the second part. Of course, Paul, this morning you mentioned that the PRI now has the commitment of firms that with the market cap together about 100 trillion. That's another development. But clarifying the concept will make it important for targeted policy. So what I would like to emphasize is to connect upstream with the downstream. So when we discussed the issues with the asset owners, they said clearly that, like a pension fund, sovereign wealth fund, saying that we are not the direct investors. We don't have the investment projects in developing countries, and we go through a kind of fund managers. That's another set of issues. Fiduciary rules there is not facilitating, as we know. We need to fix that. But then downstairs, for multinational companies, they say that, yes, we invest, but we need financing, and that part is difficult. So the connecting between multinational companies engaging in direct investment in the field, in developing countries, and the the capital market is one thing. We try to do that through our UN Sustainable Stock Exchanges. You were instrumental for that also, that at the initial stage when you work in the UN, Paul. The thing is that stock exchange is the kind of vehicle that can bring the upstream players, asset owners, asset managers, together with the downstream issuers, all we call companies, and the policymakers, security regulators, and host country investment promotion agencies. We need to put them together to ensure that all these funds are channeled and to go onto the ground. So this is kind of investment chain approach, partnership approach, multi-stakeholder dialogue, and also a kind of international partnership for building pipeline backbone projects on the ground in SDG sectors in developing countries. That's the critical thing. That's why in the morning I mentioned the problem is on the recipient side in developing countries. Policy framework is not in place. the international investment framework is not in place. All these 3,400 investment treaties that constitute international investment regime all predated SDGs. And that's why they don't mention and they don't promote SDGs or targeted SDG sectors. Countries, their national policy framework is not factoring or mainstreaming SDGs yet. So that is the challenge. And then we need to work with investment promotion agencies in developing countries in partnership with multinational companies, international organizations to build pipeline projects.
James, Dr. Zhang, you've captured that beautifully, and I think very important distinctions. And again, we're seeing different systems, not necessarily dysfunctional, but not aligned, whether it's the ones that Mervyn refers to on the accounting standards and sustainability standards, or as you say, long-standing trade agreements, which have a history, there is no alignment. And I guess part of, again, our challenge is reimagining through partnership, through SDG 17, how we do this. So again, thanks to UNCTAD. We're looking forward to your World Investment Forum. Hopefully we'll be meeting in Abu Dhabi in October as the pandemic wanes. Let's hope for that. And I will now go across to Professor Watchman, who again has anchored this process for 8 months. And Paul, just as a bridge, we've talked about big systems, and we go from 100,000 feet, and we talk about the investment chain and capital markets and foreign direct investment. I know that you have focused on some of the specific role of really important intermediaries, whether that's accountants or it's professional services, but I know you've looked at the legal profession. So I'm wondering if we can dig down into that, coming off the back of this morning's discussion, the important leverage points of changing the system. So Professor Watchman, over to you. And again, thank you for your leadership. You have 6 minutes.
Thank you. Back in 2005, when we looked at fiduciary duties in intermediaries and investment managers and asset owners, we decided that if we focus on intermediaries, we could perhaps nudge a change because there are far fewer of those than others. Now, ESG for lawyers has been moving very fast. You remember that Professor King said this morning that the problem with governance was it was more quantitative, a box-ticking exercise, than qualitative. And when he said that, I remembered that just the other day, there had been research published in respect of the fact that boards of directors are ill-equipped. Over 80% of board of directors are ill-equipped to deal with ESG issues. And also, when I spoke this morning about the moral compass and the lawyer, there is an article just today in the Financial Times about the barrister who was engaged by the Chinese government to prosecute dissidents in Hong Kong. And the question arose about whether he should have taken that particular role. ESG is fast moving and no more than law firms. Law firms seem to have, since 2018, greatly accelerated the delivery of their services on ESG. And one of the interesting things we can see is that both have they responded to demands for their clients, because companies and banks have got much more ESG measurements to fulfill. There are more ESG questions being asked of them, and they're turning to the lawyers. And part of the reason they're turning to lawyers is that there has been a bit of a tsunami of legislation and regulation which has demanded disclosure, accountability and transparency, and we see that both through the EU and at international level. We also are aware of a number of what I call ESG scandals or controversies. You have Boohoo and the textile trade, Rio Tinto and the destruction of sacred sites in Aboriginal sites in Australia, and of course Nestle and Cargill and the action in the US Supreme Court at the moment. So what we did, because when we're looking at this, we decided that we might look at 50 law firms worldwide, from the very large Magic Circle firms to the white shoe firms in New York, to international firms, to national firms in Australia and Germany and France and the Netherlands, and boutique firms who have specialized in this area, perhaps as plaintiff lawyers for some particular time. And the research has shown us a number of things. One is that law firms are responding to ESG in a way in which they have never done before. They're investing capital in this, and they're investing marketing effort. I said this morning, and I don't know if anyone did it, if you put in the name of a law firm that you are aware of, just in terms of its general practice, whether it be Australian or American or British or German, and then put the initials when you get to the site ESG, and I think you'll be amazed how many hits you get on that. Now, we have had external pressures on law firms from their clients to deliver ESG, but we also have internal pressures. As I said this morning, ESG is a hot button for recruitment and for retention of staff. It's something that is feeding through into the culture of law firms. Law firms are realizing it's not enough to sign up to UN Global Compact or to various standards in terms of carbon reduction and limitation. They have to do it themselves, and they have to decide, and this is a difficult thing for lawyers, they have to decide which clients they wish to represent, because it does appear to be inconsistent, to put it conservatively. It does seem to be inconsistent for a law firm to seek to participate in improving the world through, or improving their environment through things like the circular economy, whereas at the same time providing legal services to clients who are building coal-fired power stations or are pushing climate change difficulties forward. So we have ESG emerging in law firms, both through external pressures of their clients and internal pressures from their staff. And one of the things that's quite interesting is I spoke to Unilever recently, and they've said exactly the same thing. They regard ESG as an important aspect of recruiting the best people, and they regard it as fundamental to their brand. And that's why they've committed to ensuring in their supply chain, I think by 2030, that all the suppliers pay a living wage. So we can see this affect the culture in law firms: gender equality, racial equality, aspects of social mobility, and sexual and other discrimination are things that law firms are having to deal with, not only for their clients, but for themselves. And this is a really important aspect of an intermediary stepping forward and saying, we will change our practices. We will develop lawyers in a more integrated, holistic way to look across the ESG horizon. So I'll just leave it there, Paul, and if anyone's got any questions, I'll have to answer them.
Professor Watchman, as ever, enlightening. And that's the end of the opening speakers. So thanks to Professor King, Dr. James Zan, and Professor Watchman. Let me bridge in a way. During lockdown, a lot of people have fallen in love with jigsaw puzzles. Would you agree? It's happened.
Yes.
Whether grannies and grandfathers and children. And when you face a 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzle, the initial instinct is to shy away from it and think, good Lord, I've got to spend 6 hours with a 6-year-old or something like that. What's the metaphor? The metaphor is these types of discussions, whether it's James Zan's investment chain and FDI and different flows and different pools of capital. For me, that's part of the framing jigsaw, as is Mervyn King's, the systems, the accounting systems, the standards. It would frame the ultimate picture, or it should do. Professor Watchman's reference to law is, it's a series of very, very important pieces that are changing. And part of our challenge A is for the moderator not to say too much, to move on to the people with real experience, but just to capture that picture. There's complexity. There's so much experience around the table in terms of lawyers, entrepreneurs, last mile entrepreneurs, politicians, diplomats. We've all got different parts of the jigsaw to put into play. So let's move ahead. 2 quick points. This process will end up in the Waterberg Declaration. It opens for consultation on February the 1st. It will run for 2 months, a global consultation, and then it will be a set of business, investment, and entrepreneurial recommendations to the UNCTAD World Investment Forum, which we will launch, and we would hope that companies sign on to it. We have a draft. We'll circulate it after this. The second piece that I would like to say is that I won't say it. I'm going to move on to the next speaker. So I open panel 1, and I am absolutely delighted to welcome speaker 1, Sean Flannery, who is the vice chair of Corporate Knights and the former CIO of one of the largest global asset management companies, State Street Global Advisors. Sean, I've just remembered what I was going to say, which is the structure of today is very simple. We have a panel with speakers and then a respondent. Then we move into another panel, speakers and a respondent. And then we have 2 special guests coming on at the end who'll be interviewed by me, and then we close. So Sean, the floor is yours for 6.5 minutes, or even less if you wish.
I will do my very best, and thank you, Paula, and it truly is an honor to join you here this morning. Let me first just frame this very, as you say, very complex issue. And what I was thinking about first for my comments was, where are we right now? How is this different? What opportunities are arising? And clearly, the pandemic has exposed all sorts of systemic problems. And but perhaps one of the benefits of that is that, pardon me, it also is training the spotlight very clearly on governments and on corporations and how they responded to their constituencies in this environment and where they failed them. And I think this is something that is profound, and it's here to stay. Many of us have been talking about these things for years, but this has really laid bare those connections. And really, in a way, Paul, to get to your last mile issue, it really has made it very clear, I think, to most of us that we are much more viscerally connected than perhaps we believed before. So I think I've got a couple of thoughts on what I think is going to really be changing in the investment community. And the first one actually relates back to what Professor King was speaking about, and that is information. It may be, in a way, a boring point, but I would assert that the biggest issue we've faced has not been the willingness of investors to form capital to support these enterprises. It is really a lack of consistent and comparable data. And again, Professor King made that very clear in his comments earlier. So it is this data that really enables those people making investment decisions. We'll set aside regulators for the moment. This is what permits them to go and identify leaders and laggers, for example, in industries. And it has been a vexing issue for a long time. So no matter how sophisticated our delivery of data or our capacity to analyze the data, we must get the data in the first place. That goes to what we now see as expanding and hopefully much more consistent standards of required disclosures, and that is, in my view, absolutely critical. We can, by the way, also identify pathways that may make this job easier when we think about advances in technology, including artificial intelligence, for example, and unique identifiers that really may help us get to that final mile. So I think this also fits together with much more powerful demands from investors. looking for companies to articulate clearly their strategy toward demonstrating greater stewardship for employees, communities, and the environment. So data is the first point that I would bring to the table. But secondly, and very importantly, I think in equity and debt analysis alike, we now will finally be reframing to a longer time horizon for analysis. Many of us have been decrying the negative aspects of short-termism, but we really haven't seen much. We've seen a lot of institutional rigidities in being able to take a longer view on companies. And so the nature of this pandemic, the economic and socio-political impact of this, I think will require us to look at risk management in a very different way, to incorporate in a much more present and measurable way what could be distant risks that we may have talked about incorporating, but I'm not convinced they very often got to the actual buy or sell decision, which was rooted in something much more short term. So we're going to move from this focus on quarterly earnings reports to vulnerabilities in human and financial capital, and so that's that is very important. In knowing that we're short on time, I guess what I would like to focus my last few minutes on is how is it that can we identify ways that this jigsaw puzzle, this mosaic, gets pulled together? And I would submit to you that that one of the enemies to this has been a demand that that we find these omnibus solutions that satisfy all stakeholders. And as an investment person, I would say, time. Okay, so let me just wind it up there. We now know that through different forms of blended capital, we can do the sort of things that will be responsive to the stimulus that we will now see coming down the path. This massive stimulus creates a great opportunity for long-term financing to make changes in our energy, health, and other infrastructures, and that has great multiplicative impact, and also can reorient our economies towards something much more productive and supportive of the SDGs going forward. Paul, I think you're on mute. Yeah.
Yes. What did Albert Einstein say about that? Repeated actions. Sean, I've got one question for you, and thank you for your comments. Just a simple question. If we go back to the noughties, early noughties, mid noughties, when you were the chief investment officer of one of the largest asset managers in the world, I think you were running close to $4 trillion at the time, maybe a bit less, 3.4. In that period, do you think there really has been a sea change within the investment management asset owner community? Are you optimistic, or do you think that we need more of a cultural change? It's a PhD thesis. You could talk forever, but give us your quick hit reflex.
Well, of course, let me give you a quick hit on this. Look, this has been a very difficult situation for the largest asset managers, because any decision that is made with regard to a proxy vote is going to have supporters and detractors. And so we do have to recognize that ultimately we are talking about businesses. So I'm not defending that, I'm describing that. What I will tell you is, with my work advising the World Bank's IFC on what is now the Amundi Emerging Green 1 Fund, and my work with the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, I've had the opportunity to work on to put out investment mandates. And I have met with many of the largest asset managers in the world. Without exception, they all now have significant, varying qualities, but they make a significant effort to incorporate ESG into those decisions. And what I would submit, perhaps cynically, is regardless of whether or not they are true believers, what they do understand very clearly is consumers are demanding that this be included in the decision-making process. That is not going away.
Everybody capture that thought. That's an important pivot point. Thank you, Sean, and we will come back to you. I'm delighted to now sweep south from Boston and really delighted to welcome Ambassador Carmen Gisela Vergara, who's the Executive Director of Pro Panama. So, Ambassador, welcome. 6 minutes, 7 minutes on Panama and your feeling in the context of Central and perhaps Southern America and the international response, also from your business community in terms of the pandemic. The floor is yours.
Yes.
Ambassador, you're on mute.
Good morning, everyone, or afternoon, depending on which side of the world you're on right now. And thank you for the invitation to speak at this roundtable. Thank you, Paul. I think that Panama, as the rest of the global economy, needs to generate decisive action to rebuild its economy after the COVID-19 pandemic. And to do so, it is crucial not only to revise our medium and long-term goals, but instead to introduce fresh thinking about the ways those ambitions and aspirations can set in motion multi-stakeholder change process, because that is the key, to involve as many as we can and leave no one behind. And the pandemic has highlighted the power of governments to spur economic growth, getting firms to invest in key sectors and helping channel resources to big societal problems, from producing and distributing vaccines at a global scale and break the neck speed to ensure that the world continues to move away from fossil fuels and transitions into a green economy, as we're seeing with Europe's plan, for instance. And Panama, it's in a privileged position to do this right now, because for years, our country has been successful leveraging its strategic position in the global trade and investment landscape and generating sustained growth to graduate from a middle-income country to a high-income country in a single generation. And that in itself is a huge accomplishment. But Panama also has to incorporate more new tendencies of growth and development. And there is more room for improvement, as with everything, I guess. In fact, in 2019, President Laurentino Cortizo entrusted us to begin working on a new investment strategy for the country. And the benefits of growth need to be more evenly distributed. And there are several challenges that still have to be addressed in order to do so. This is why the National Investment Strategy for Panama targets sustainable investments with a social impact. And it includes indicators that ensure all investments have a positive impact in the key measures to follow up that positive impact, including gender equality, the environment, and generating shared prosperity, especially among those communities that are traditionally left behind. And Panama has several examples of working with the private sector and with academia and with a civil society in generating increased opportunities for sustainable development. Entire legal frameworks have been adopted, for example, to facilitate the rise of the film industry, managing not only to facilitate the growth of local productions, but also generating attraction from top Hollywood films. And we have also managed to bring several government offices to facilitate companies to establish their regional headquarters, not only in terms of facilities for doing business, but also paying attention to details, which are so important for investors, especially right now. When we enacted the regional headquarters law, we worked together with the Ministry of Education and the Ministry of Labor and others to ensure enough schools were available for the children of the expats that were coming to work in the multilateral firms, in the multinational firms that were coming to Panama. And that was not part of the law, but it was part of the service that Panama as a country thought it should provide to ensure the peace of mind that investors need to have when they are selecting a site for their projects. And in 2021, Panama is seeking to build on the lessons it has learned in each of the economy sectors that we're promoting to leverage them into a system-wide transformation. This means recalibrating the collaboration between public and private sector, exploring new avenues and generating incentives for innovations across finance, trade, investment, human capital, and striving for both consistency and ambition, a good mix of the two. And this is, of course, a huge challenge. And this is where governments can greatly benefit from partnerships, including with private sector, academia, the civil society, and multilateral entities such as UNTAD. And for Panama, an essential existing asset is the privileged geographic position, as I mentioned, within the global trade and investment landscape. And for years, it has capitalized on this to generate sustained investment to some of its key economic growth engines, including knowledge-intensive industries, such as services, the digital industry, logistics, and finance. And a key element of this has been working with entrepreneurs to ensure foreign investment comes not only with financial resources, but with the necessary transfer of technology and experience required to spur innovation at the local scale. We're adding local or domestic value to the products produced in Panama that comprise our export offer. And as a result of those efforts, including other public and private initiatives, we have managed to bridge the gap between foreign and local capacities to bring innovation to business and ensure their sustainability. As a starting point of this, a solid basis of human and financial resources to deliver on the next generation of social and environmental investments required to comply with the Sustainable Development Goals through the alliances necessary to accomplish them. But we are aware that we need to pay attention to those more traditionally left behind, including the youth and women and the indigenous communities. As contemplated in our national investment strategy, we now need to make sure that they too can participate in the benefits of globalization, allowing them fair and equal access to the opportunities that have made our country a case study in economic development. And bringing them on board too will be necessary to ensure that actions to deliver on other SDGs, including environmental issues, access to energy and water, gender, health, and job creation that spurs economic growth, can take place within the following decade. So in that context, marked by an increased complex set of global challenges, asset management and other investors need to adopt a core set of principles that will help guide their investment decisions. Locally, those principles are already embodied in a tool as well known as the Sustainable Development Goals. And they could develop a new set of principles. But as I always say, why should we try inventing the wheel again? This set of principles are established in the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And this is our collective roadmap for development. And the incorporation of SDGs into profit investment analysis can be a transformative strategy that will address the inequalities between and within countries, foster the digital economy, promote decarbonization, and ensure all economies can recover better after COVID-19 pandemic.
Ambassador,
Thank you, Paul.
no, thank you for your comments. And it sparked a very quick thing in my head, which you've referred a number of times to the sustainable finance and the strategic investment plan. It's so important to have a plan and a direction. That's clear. My a personal note, my father was a merchant navy captain from the 40s through to the 1980s. The first time he was a captain, he took a ship through the Panama Canal. And he didn't take a pilot on board, which is the normal thing. You take a pilot to take you through the canal. And he obviously thought he was, he's made it, he was a captain. And it was seen as a very, very immature act of seamanship. So that for me was a metaphor of not taking a pilot through the canal is where we've gone wrong on sustainability. And if we have the pilot and we have the plan, that helps. So I hope you don't mind me interspersing that personal memory. But he luckily got the ship through. But there you go. There's a connection. So thank you for your rich comments. And I'm now going to move in a way. We've lost a little bit of time, but it's fine. We're comfortable. So I'm going to do this. We have Louise Meyer from who's an investment advisor and former managing partner of Brookfield Asset Management in Brazil, and a dear friend who I've known for 20 years more. And I won't go into that. We also have Mike Sherry from a company called Mawezi. So let me put it like this. The next two speakers take us into the realm of a really significant utility company, which is a sort of an amazing story of rebirth in Brazil, and a Kenyan story providing distributed services and productive technologies to last mile communities in the Lake Victoria region. I won't spoil the story, but those two companies, one in Brazil, one in Kenya, are talking about how to, in some ways, merge and find new business models to serve last mile communities. I think it's a marvelous example, but I'll stop there. I'll go to Luis Meyer, who's based in Sao Paulo. And again, he is the former managing partner of Brookfield's Asset Management Brazil, one of the largest asset managers in the world and a very, very significant infrastructure player. So Louise, over to you, and then you pass the baton to Mike. But thank you. And again, Ambassador, thank you very much.
Okay, greetings from São Paulo, Brazil. Thank you very much. Paul, it's always a big pleasure to see you. Our friendship goes back to 20 years when I launched the first social responsible investment fund, triple bottom line at that time. And you were running UNEP-FI and came over and give us a big help. I think personally that COVID-19 is a wake-up call for the humanity at large. I think that's is for us. I would also see this as a big opportunity, a tremendous opportunity for investments as well. I think, Dr. Zan, I think we have a very good opportunity to share with you, and the good news that it is possible to channelize money to the last mile, and that's what we are trying to do. I think we are living today a collaborative economy. I think the model is changing. I think what happened in the world in the last 10 months is changing the mindset of business. I agree with you, Dr. Zan, that money is abundant, fundraising is available. We are living today a negative interest era, so money is chasing some sort of returns, but it's difficult. The tricky thing is from an asset management company, a private equity investor, is to pass the money to the last mile. That's the element that we need to work. But we do have a case in Brazil that I think it could picture a little bit the success, how we can do that. But we need a collaboration. We need a partnership. We can always do this by ourselves. And 3 years ago, we bought one of the largest sanitation companies in Brazil, rebranded to name it BRK. We are servicing 15 million Brazilians with water and treating wastewater as well. We are in 13 states throughout the country. Brazil is a continental country, it's quite big. And we had this discussion that the company is not a company treating water and wastewater is a social impact enterprise. We need to change the quality of living of Brazilians, and we need to give our hand to the most vulnerable Brazilians, the ones that they don't have access to education, they don't have access to sanitation, so forth, so on. So we start figuring out how to do it. And the way that we found clearance and to move ahead is through the collaboration process. And when we saw that we didn't have the skills, the tradition, and experience to handle the last mile element of our business, especially in the rural areas of Brazil, we started chasing around whoever could help us. And then we found this NGO in the United States named water.org, which was founded by the actor Matt Damon. And it had a very successful experience in Central America. So we imported that concept into Brazil, which is a microcredit. Because the problem for our company, we don't finance the connection between our pipelines to the household, especially on the most vulnerable communities. And they don't have money to do it. And they don't have even money to have a bathroom. So what Water.org does, they classify and they authorize microcredit in different parts of Brazil to finance and to give money to the households to do the connection and to build a bathroom. So that was the way for us to generate more income, of course, but at the same token, getting the system from someone else to do an important element, which is the last mile. We don't do the last mile. And now we are of the discussion that we are entering the houses with clear water. I think the wastewater. We need to bring more to the families, to the households, which is education, which is a quality of living, which is food in a way. So we need to treat them to elevate. And what we're seeing today after the COVID-19 is that the social classes are moving downwards. And we have no time to wait. We cannot wait another 10 years to re-enter a big portion of the society to the level that they were a few years ago. So the action is to do right now. And the way that we see is that this is the big opportunity that we have. So we are testing and working together with this other company in Kenya, run by Michael Sherry, that's going to explain to us a little bit, in order to bring a very successful experience in Kenya into Brazil. Mawezi does that, and we are exploring the possibility to joint efforts in order to move ahead with the last mile opportunity. So there is plenty of money available. We want to have access, but we need to have the clear minds and we have the good experience to move on. Without that, I don't think that our mission will be fully completed. It's not giving back to our shareholders. We need also to give back to the stakeholders. And we do have a lot of stakeholders to handle. So just in a few words, this is a true fact. It's happening. I think it's happening in Brazil. It's happening all over the world. And poor communities, we have plenty in Brazil, but we need to have them a clear path for their future. And they're staying behind. And this is something that the private sector, together with the public sector, could do it together. We cannot only blame and ask for the support of the public sector. We need to do our part as a private sector player. And that's SDG 17 comes all about. The government is providing for us today the regulatory framework, the ground base of law, and we will provide the capital. We will get the capital, but for a 30-year concession, we need to have clearance that the law will stay for the period of time that our investments. So again, this is a collaborative process, and more we will see this flourishing and benefiting the society at large. So this is more or less the message that I would like to pass, Paul. Thank you very much.
Really wonderful, thank you. And that idea of a collaborative business model, which can be perhaps replicated and scaled and embedded in other parts of the world. So absolutely. I'm going to come straight over to Mike Sherry, who's the founder of Mawezi, which, Mike, if I remember rightly, Mawezi means moonlight in Swahili. So tell us about your experience in the Lake Victoria region near Kisumu and the development of your company over the last 7 to 8 years, and the link with BRK Ambiental. Mike, the floor is yours.
Sure. Thank you very much, Paul. Pleasure as ever. So I'm going to just start with the pandemic. I guess what it's taught us, it's shown us that redundancy or disaggregation or decentralized infrastructure is critical for any organization to be sustainable. This approach, for us at least, has de-risked our value chains for investors, for customers and employees. And as a last mile distributor, we bring decentralized renewable energy infrastructure to our customers, de-risking them from expensive polluting fossil fuels and unreliable or even non-existent grid power for home energy use, and of course, reducing their costs. We are now bringing scalable productive use appliances as well to our customers that can generate income and save costs as well. But decentralization for me also means people, local talent development and empowerment. Louise spoke about some of that just now. Many of the companies in our industry have non-native leadership teams, and we believe local teams to be independently investable. That's what we're trying to build. Decentralized is now possible because of digital technology. We have 50,000 customers now who make 150,000 mobile money payments directly to us every month. And we send out 400,000 SMS messages to those customers. It's a fully automated, scalable, integrated digital technology ecosystem. And that's the key, I think. And we do this by deploying local hubs in the communities we serve. So we've got 19 hubs in Western Kenya. And this moves value into these communities, again, which we think is essential. And that's jobs, education, digital access, cost savings, and income generating opportunities. I think the role of larger businesses, as Louise spoke to, is really exciting because it's difficult sometimes to get scaled finance into our sorts of businesses because we're not well recognized. But large businesses can bring lots of other things to us, like technical assistance, design, engineering expertise even. And also considering large businesses increasing statutory obligations to better serve the least well-off customers. That is growing in many states, moving obligations from governments to corporates. And I guess the socioeconomic future value of better off, more resilient customers, that to me is the nexus of sustainability. Locally focused last mile businesses, digital technology and large corporates working together. So we're planning to basically gear up our local experience for the last 7 years, as you mentioned, Paul, using the digital technology. We're product agnostic. We don't manufacture our own products. We try and bring the best products for those particular customers' needs. And we're going to do that either directly or in conjunction partnerships with other companies who've already got established customer bases. So I think it's a really interesting time, and I think there's opportunities there. One of our biggest challenges is always access to capital and finance. And I think despite being one of the few businesses in our space that's scalable and profitable, finance from anyone other than the few specialists in our field has been very, very difficult. We generate collateral as receivables from our customers, and this is not well understood as an asset class. And so most financial institutions will not lend against it, despite our non-recoverable being about 6.4% of sales. To make a real impact, sustainability, we need to work really with large corporates to build these last mile businesses to serve a multitude of customers. So to work with and deliver those SDGs, we want to build an investable asset class in the near future. And that could need technical assistance, some direct investment, but be very clear about what is needed to make this investable. That's what we need to determine. And then we've got scale. So we need to look at what returns, liquidity, and standby service provision large investors need for us to be able to actually get those funds to that last mile. So that was my thoughts on the process. I think it's about, Paul, it's about collaboration. It's about building last mile businesses that have that digital infrastructure inbuilt so that we can then scale them and the impact to those last mile communities and move value into those last mile communities. Is that enough?
Sherry, yeah, I just want you to give one little bit of color in terms of the solar, the clean energy is clear, and that was at the heart of the business in terms of the distribution. But as you moved on to productive agricultural technologies, I don't know if you want to pick the egg incubator,
Okay,
or one
sure.
other, but give a really grassroots example of how that piece of kit can change a family's life in terms of education and health.
Yeah, I think you've got to think about in last mile communities that a business might be a home business, and it might not be a business in the terms that we would recognize in the global north, perhaps. So we've introduced, in fact, next week we're introducing solar egg incubators. So these are what we call pay-go, so the customer doesn't have to come up with upfront capital, they pay over a period of time. And an egg incubator simply increases the yield of hatchlings for a small scale farmer. We've done it so that it's scalable. So you can start with, say, growing 48 eggs and then scale that up to 100 plus. The great thing about an egg incubator like that is because you end up with more productivity from it, the ROI on that particular product is about 1,200% a year. So it makes a lot of sense for our customers. And for us, again, if we can make our customers more profitable or more sustainable, if you like, that makes good sense for us. The scalability of it means that you can do it from a household level all the way up to kind of a small micro business. And also, the great thing about something like chickens is that you can sell them after 28 days of starting the process. You can start selling them as chicks all the way through to completely reared hens. So it's something that can be done at a very, very small scale up to a much larger scale. And
Mike,
so
that's a great example, and I can't resist this. So I had the pleasure of a site visit to one of Mike's hubs near Lake Victoria, and Mike, I think it's fair to say, a couple of years ago, your manager Beryl, super bright, lovely lady, standing in the shop and showing what had happened. And Mike, you were, to be honest, a bit ponderously explaining to this lady Beryl how you could now have pay-go solar productive agricultural technologies, and that you wanted to start distributing that. And you were being a mentor, you were being a tutor, until you learned that Beryl had a first degree in agriculture, a master's in agricultural economics, and was a PhD candidate, and that she knew more about farming than you ever would. And it was an epiphanal moment for me, because I've rarely seen you sort of take a back step, but when you came out of the shop, you knew that you'd been tutoring someone who was born into a farming family, whose father had taken it from a small family farm into something bigger. And that was a real lesson for me. The power of Beryl in Kisumu region of Kenya, and understanding exactly what the agricultural value chain and what was possible. So Mike, Sherry and Louise, it was a sort of double shoe tap, if you don't mind the expression, but I think that's a wonderful example of bigger utility, interesting business model, cutting edge, take it, create it, replicate it, spin it out, deliver value, deliver the SDGs. Thank you for that segment, gentlemen. And now I'm going to go move swiftly. We are running a little bit behind. But listen, what we did this morning was we ran over a few minutes. Now, if we can all relax, and I know some people would have to leave on the next hour, but if we go to 5 past or even 10 past the hour, we can be comfortable. So that's what I'm going to suggest. And I'm going to go straight to, and if I speak less, we'll be much more effective. But again, Mike, Louise, thank you so much. I'm going to go to Alexandra Noble of Pensions for Purpose, who's going to respond. You have the impossible job in a few minutes, Alexandra, of picking up what you heard from the opening and from that panel and feeding back to us. So the floor is yours, and we're delighted you're with us again. You're definitely the best responder I've ever come across.
Well, thank you very much for that compliment, Paul. I'm delighted to be part of the session, and it's really interesting. I'm going to do what I did last time, which to try and make it as brief as possible, which is just to pull out some key words or phrases, such as we had on the sessions on Monday. And I've got the list from Monday in front of me, and there's an awful lot of similarity, which makes it actually rather exciting to think that so many people are actually on the same page and taking this forward. So one of the first point is harmonizing standards and frameworks, which I think is critical. And as an ex-investor, an ex-investment fund manager, I think that is so important. The next word that I'd like to draw out is accountability. And I think that's something that, you know, big corporates have really got to get their heads around. And I like Sean's comments about not quite sure whether they're all bought into it, but they're doing it. And yeah, that's certainly true. Let's hope by the end of, in the next 10 years, they're actually more than just thinking about it. And the next big word, and this has come up lots of times, and it came up quite a few times on Monday, is collaborate. And obviously that brings us back to the SDG 17 and is absolutely critical for us to move forward from the situation that we've all globally found ourselves in as a result of COVID. But there's a real sense of encouragement around the table, or the virtual table, in terms of the fact that there is a big opportunity, and maybe it's time to start rethinking how we do things on a global basis, rather than going back to the old normal and creating the new normal. Let's do something different. And I think there's a real sense that that's pretty important. A lot of talk about the investment chain and the international dialogue that we need to establish there, and to ensure that we get the funding down to that last mile, absolutely critical. And particularly those last two stories from Luis and Mike were absolutely brought that point out, I think, for us all. And I'd just like to go back to Professor Watchman's point about the ESG being fast moving through the intermediaries. And I think we've certainly seen that in the law firms. I'm a bit disappointed we haven't seen quite the same speed with the investment consultants, who, particularly in the UK, are so critical to our pension funds investing through the SDGs. So hopefully that will change. The other few words that I think came up: de-risking, critical again, and encouraging that there's plenty of money available, particularly with interest rates where they are globally at the moment. There is plenty of money available, and we really must see and encourage that to get down to the last mile. And education, I think that was sort of a subtext for quite a few people, and I think that's something that came up again on Monday, that education and equality is absolutely vital to moving the story forward. And of course, probably the most important factor is the whole digital movement, and all the technology that is possible now really should encourage us to make things happen. I mean, it really is possible, as Mike was sharing his stories. The digital tech is absolutely critical to taking things forward. I think just finally, I'd like to pick up the point that Mike made about building new investable asset classes. I think that's something that we on the investment side of business have really got to start thinking about, and how we encourage pension funds, which is obviously where I'm coming from, pension funds to be thinking differently. And I think that's critical. So I've tried to make that as swift as possible, Paul. Hopefully that will, I don't know whether that will hopefully give us a couple more minutes. But thank you. Fascinating stories, absolutely great to listen to everybody. And I'm looking forward to the next panel.
Alexandra, that is absolutely, I'm just checking I'm not on mute. Thank you so much again. I mean, on the nail, sharp, succinct, and it helps bring the threads. You've collapsed some of the jigsaw pieces into place wonderfully. So appreciate that. Now, that's the end of panel one. Let's move on to panel two with a different flavor. I just want to check in the background, do we have Pierre Thiam from Senegal, and do we have Etherin Kusan on, if you can check for me. If not, I'll change the order of speakers. But let's go to our first speaker, who is Jeff Kendall, who's the co-founder of Future Fit Foundation, a UK charity. For the sake of full disclosure, I do chair the board of trustees of that charity. But Jeff, over to you to tell the story and project what you've heard. Thank you very much for joining us. So you're the first speaker in panel two.
Thank you very much, Paul. Can you hear me okay?
You can hear you fine, yeah.
Excellent, thank you. So it's a real pleasure to be here with such a distinguished and eclectic group of speakers. I'm really pleased to be joining you. I'll try and keep this brief given the timing. I just want to share with you a few thoughts on how we can make much more rapid and radical progress toward the SDGs. And it really starts with instilling in people a new sense of urgency and of agency, okay? We're going to start with the urgency. So there's no end of headlines and campaigns on the need to act now and avoid the most catastrophic impacts of climate change, biodiversity loss, and so on. But most people are just carrying on as if it's business as usual. So what's the disconnect? Well, there's some research from 2019 that sheds some light on this. The researchers asked thousands of people how they felt about a catastrophe that would end human civilization completely, compared with one that would cause massive deaths but allow our species to survive. And amazingly, most people thought there wasn't a very big difference between the two. When the same people were asked to imagine a long, peaceful, flourishing human future, they suddenly changed their mind and rated human extinction as much worse. And the research concluded that many people at the moment are suffering from a sort of hopelessness, that they can't actually see a path to a better future, so they don't care too much about losing it. So if we're going to get people to really step up, we need to convince them that the future is worth fighting for. And our current narratives around systemic challenges like climate change are almost all negative, which instills not desire, but fear. We're shouting at people to slam on the brakes when we should be enticing them to change course and speed up in pursuit of a far better world. And I'll use ESG reporting as an example. We've heard a lot about sustainability and ESG reporting today. Now, the major standards from GRI, SASB, CDP, and others, and the hundreds of ESG ratings and rankings all focus on gradually reducing negative impacts. So how can we tell who the real game changers are? The companies who are actually drawing down CO2 out of the atmosphere, or bringing their customers out of poverty, or enriching biodiversity through their supply chains. ESG reports and ratings don't tell you that. At best, they tell you who is least bad in a particular industry, which is not exactly inspiring stuff. We've got to move beyond, with our narratives, move beyond responsibility and risk to focus on regeneration and resilience in pursuit of a flourishing future for all. But even if we come up with the most compelling destination, it won't make a difference unless people feel that it's attainable. And that's where the sense of agency comes in. And unfortunately, our economic system's against us here. And that's because in the past 70 years, GDP has become our default measure of success. GDP is just a measure of how much money is flowing through the economy. It says nothing about the quality of the outcomes for people or planet, which result from all those financial transactions. So this is like sitting in a car and slamming down on the gas to get the rev counter as high as possible without checking whether the car is in gear and going in the direction you want. What today's companies need is not a rev counter, it's a sat nav. Okay. Most business guidance on the SDGs is focused on reporting, and a lot of it is nothing more than shuffling around the existing ESG guidelines into the SDG boxes. Instead, what we need is to equip companies with a new suite of management metrics, ones which guide day-to-day decisions to get business onto a new trajectory. And this is where our work at Future Fit Foundation comes in. So 1 minute, thanks, Paul.
No, Jeff.
No?
Jeff, I was welcoming Pierre Thiam.
Oh, okay, I thought that was your shut up quick sign.
2 minutes is
Great.
good.
Okay, I only need one.
Yeah.
So we're aiming at Future Fit to catalyze a shift in both business mindsets and business metrics. So our work involves translating system science into practical free-to-use tools. Earth and social systems scientists have for decades known what we must do and not do to strengthen our social foundations and live within planetary boundaries. But often that knowledge is buried in academic journals and is too complex and abstract to be easily put into practice. It's as if the rules of the game are written, but most people can't read them. They're in a language we don't understand. So what we've done is translate that science into a methodology to help any organization assess the extra financial impacts of its actions, both positive and negative. And we call it the Future Fit Business Benchmark, and it's free for anyone to use. And you can think of this, as I say, as a sat-nav to success for 21st century business. Helps companies of all shapes and sizes set the right ambitions, take better day-to-day decisions in pursuit of those ambitions, and explain their impacts, good and bad, in a way that customers, employees, and investors understand. We've got a range of global companies using this, people like The Body Shop and Novo Nordisk, as well as a couple of mainstream pension funds. But we've also done a lot to ensure that it can be used by social enterprises and small companies too, as well as impact investors. And we've worked with some truly game-changing SMEs in India and Africa over the past 3 years to double check that that works. We're only small, but we're growing quickly. And this year we're running at least a dozen national workshops with the UN Global Compact in partnership with their local networks to help SMEs in those countries respond authentically and ambitiously to the SDGs. And the second half of this year, we're launching a web-based management dashboard to help companies really start to embed this into how they're doing business. I'll leave it there, but if you want to know more, please take a look at futurefitbusiness.org. Thank you.
Jeff, Kendall, as ever, marvelous, wonderful. Thank you for being succinct. One thought from my side, looking at a dim and dark past in the 1980s, I was a tabloid reporter in the UK and occasionally worked for someone called The Sun. And one of my tests of sustainability ever since has been, could you get the word sustainable development in a coherent headline on the front page of The Sun? Nobody's ever done it and put it into plain language. Nobody's ever done it. So don't spoil my party piece, Jeff. The key thing is we've got to get much better at selling hope, you know, and I think Future Fit in its name is part of that process. The competition is still on. If you can get a Sun-like headline describing sustainable development, you'll win a big prize.
I'm working on it.
Jeff, thank you very much indeed. Really appreciate that. I'm going to move on now to Izumi-san, who's been the most tenacious and patient speaker, having also spoken this morning. Izumi-san, it's the early hours for you now. So again, we welcome you. Izumi-san is the executive consultant from Oriental Consultants Global, OC Global, who've been a very generous supporter of the whole process. So Izumi-san, we thank you and we look forward to your comments. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Let me spend just a short ones for this late night in Japan. But I want to talk about sort of what you featured somewhere last occasion called nominication. Some of you already are familiar with this nominication, which is coming from the communication, but rather particularly used in Japan as drinking and communication, which was, of course, in the social gathering of the duty among the friends, among the people before COVID-19 came on. Nowadays, it's quite difficult for me to get together, but still we need to have some business discussion or friend discussion of gathering, whatever you can use. But to do this, you need to have certain kind of digital technology invention for collaboration, communication to be well achieved. In this sense, I think this is kind of discussion will be flourishing for this last 1 or 2 hours. It is important for us, for Japanese, but not only limited to Japanese, but Japan, lucky enough, we are using extensively so-called Uber service, for example. Of course, Uber in most of the country, it means the kind of the taxi delivery service. Whereas in Japan, Uber taxi service didn't succeed. Rather than it is, I would say, Uber Eats service. I mean, sort of food and beverage delivery service at home. So in one sense, when people want to discuss something, chatting with each other and joking each other, then they will place the order to Uber Eats. And usually 20 minutes later, the food and beverage will be delivered. And people can just simply switch on the Zoom like this today, but not seriously talking to each other like we are having today. But you may start relaxing yourself, socializing yourselves, and chatting each other by taking advantage of digital innovation, innovative schemes to be well shared. That will help very collaborative issues among others. So that will also help. So in line with the kind of the SDG goals, some of those can help in a sense. By doing this, in fact, instead of the food and beverage industry, service industry, which have been very much affected during the course of the COVID-19, but still we are under such kind of pressure, but in a sense, food and beverage service industry will be very much affected, almost about 80% down from the previous era. But now they try to revive it and secure some jobs, kind of a decent job is secured. Even in Japan, we need to see it. And then sort of people can enjoy both this advanced technology. And I hope that kind of things would be spread around in the near future in other countries, like in Asia, like in Africa, to take advantage of those. Well, let me finish since I've already spoken to you. many times, but if I repeat again, so communication instead of simple communication. That's actually one of the buzzwords. I hope you may take it. Communication can be spelled out by changing the sort of replacing C with N. Communication. All right,
So,
that's it. Thank you so much.
Azuma-san, thank you. And you've injected, really, it goes to the heart of SDG 17, collaboration and partnership. The simple act, and we all know, we've all seen the stories of Japanese salarymen and ladies and bars and drinking afterwards, but it's continued because of that critical need for human contact. But it propels economic benefits. So Uzumi-san, we take it well. It's been well understood, and we greatly appreciate your support of the event and the fact that you've stayed up so late. And without any further ado, I'm going to go to our next speaker, who I'm delighted to welcome. So it's Etherin Kuzan, who's the former executive director of the World Food Programme and now the founder of Food Systems for the Future. And Etherin, the floor is yours for 6 or 7 minutes, and we really welcome you. Let me just make a bridge. Critical, crushing impact on the last mile communities, driving people into poverty. We know, and you will know better than anyone in terms of World Food Programme, the massive increase in demand in coming months because of COVID. Give us your sense. Where are we? What can business and investment do? How do we collaborate? Over to you.
Paul, thank you very much for that introduction. And thank you to the organizers of this UNCTAD Summit for including me in the conversation. As you note, as the former executive director of the World Food Programme, I am here today to remind the audience that as we sit around the world in this discussion, some 820 million people are food insecure, with almost 150 million children undernourished. And because of COVID, conflict, and climate change, the WFP reports that now some 250 million people may be on the brink of starvation. Before I left WFP, we developed, and I am proud to say, the organization continues to invest in a strategic plan, a plan that moves the organization and their partners from saving lives to helping change lives. I'm here today in my role as the co-founder and CEO of the new impact investment facility named Food Systems for the Future, because changing lives requires moving from only providing life-saving humanitarian response to partnering with others to support food system change, which will ensure global household and community resiliency by creating food systems that not only provide economic opportunity and affordable access to nutritious food from farm to consumer. We know, and I'm sure many of your speakers have acknowledged, that no government action alone will adequately address the food system challenges. No one actor alone will sufficiently support the systematic and structural changes required to create sustainable, durable solutions necessary to meet the challenge of nutrition locally, nationally, and globally. Improving the food system and nutrition outcomes from farm to consumers will require research-driven collective partnership action between government, private sector, donors, civil society, and yes, citizens themselves. A food system capable of increasing access to nutritious food will require adequate investment across the food system ecosystem in infrastructure, education, and off-farm business development, including ag tech and innovation, as well as supporting access to affordable food through new mechanisms at the retail level. We often talk about public-private blended capital investment, yet today not enough partnerships at sufficient scale and level of ambition to meet the needs and gaps in the investment, innovation, and implementation required to fix our broken food system. This is especially true when it comes to funding growth of small and medium business enterprises, and when we're building inclusive business models that include low-income producers, workers, and consumers across the value chain. Investment funds specializing in food and agriculture continue to increase in 2019 and even in 2020. However, 60% of all private sector funds were invested in North America and Europe, with only 6% directed to opportunities to Asia Pacific. And of these dollars invested, relatively little blended finance has gone into nutrition specific solution. We talk about maximizing investments, yet in my experience, the majority of investment in agriculture today does not affect nutrition because the majority of dollars go into cash crops, cocoa, coffee, and often also in palm oil. Today, 500 million smallholder farmers with approximately 250 million with a total net income annually of $150 billion. Yet continues to be an unmet demand in smallholder finance.
Yep.
Capital supply is a limiting factor on market growth. And the question should not be how to channel the public investment, public, private, and philanthropic investment resources that will catalyze additional opportunities, but when and where. We know how. The question is, how do we move to new geographies and ensure that we are broadening the impact of this investment to other outside traditional markets that are often defined as less risk? I know I could spend a lot more time, and I'm hoping I have an opportunity to talk with many more of you. Let me close by saying, despite recent major progress recognizing nutrition's overall universal importance, large gaps remain, and we are not on track to achieve the 2030 SDG goal target. We must push harder to end malnutrition in all its forms. And it's not just governments who have a role to play in every country around the world. The private sector, businesses, and investors must also step up. Tackling undernutrition is not a moral imperative, but an economic opportunity. And an economic opportunity is definitely not a bad thing. We all win with a more productive, better educated, and healthier workforce, which will generate a positive impact on economies for generations to come. I'll close with a quote, if I may. Robert F. Kennedy once said, "There is a Chinese curse which says, may you live in interesting times." Like it or not, we live in interesting times, and COVID made it even more interesting. They are times of danger and uncertainty, but also the most creative times of any in the history of mankind. This statement is truer today than in the 1960s when Kennedy spoke these words. Creativity, innovation, supported by finance and collective action will ensure every child, wherever born, the opportunity to live her life or his life to the fullest potential, creating a better society for all. And I ask you, why not?
Erythrine, thank you for those powerful and insightful comments from someone who's operated at the very top. You talked on a tour de force of food systems and what can be done. So let me make a link, and we're going to go to my favorite Senegalese chef and activist in a minute, who has many surprises. But let me make the link. Erythrine, out of this process, we're creating something called the Waterberg Declaration. It's named after, I guess, one of the poorest regions in the Limpopo province in South Africa, but it's a global message. The collective thoughts of our 8 months will be buried in that declaration. The critical thing is the second part of the declaration, which is in a draft form now. It will be launched on Monday, will be very practical recommendations to the UN World Investment Process to deliver exactly what you're saying. One point, and then I go to Pierre Thiam. The UN has a set of principles, a UN-backed set of principles called the Principles of Responsible Investment, which Kofi Annan launched at the New York Stock Exchange in 2006. There are $100 trillion and 3,500 institutions now backing those principles. It doesn't mean that all those funds are aligned with the principles, but perhaps they should be. And perhaps we should be having a direct conversation with the institutions representing the 100 trillion to see whether we can get 0.5% of that 100 trillion a year directed to the last mile through new products, new investment approaches, new platforms. That's in the declaration. We hope you will follow it and bring your knowledge from food systems to it. But let me, on behalf of all of you, thank you. And I'm going to bounce on now. That was great. And I think everybody enjoyed it. So we've got next Pierre Thiam. Oh, you've gone left. You were right, Pierre, on my screen. So Pierre is a Senegalese chef, an activist based both in the US and in Senegal. I think you've got a new baby of less than one, Pierre, if I'm correct. So, you know, the future is his, but the floor is yours. So Pierre, you have your 6 minutes. How do you take it all? Pierre, you're on mute. You've committed my sin.
Okay, can you hear me?
You're good, Pierre. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. It was really, really inspiring to hear Mrs. Cousins. She was very powerful, and I think it's a great segue to get into my talk. I'm going to start with a quote from your countryman. Churchill said, "Never let a good crisis go to waste." And I think the pandemic is the type of crisis that can be a great catalyst for change. It has highlighted the deep inequities of our economic system, but it also offers to us a unique window to come up with revolutionary solutions. There has never been a more opportune time for changing a broken system. And Mrs. Kazan talked about it, and this is general. The growing consciousness of these inequalities has fostered an equally greater desire for a more equitable society. For businesses to play a role in accelerating this movement, we must first address the structural causes of these inequities by reducing the income gap and by strengthening the social safety nets. We must intentionally design our business models to benefit not just the shareholders, but also the frontline workers. Post-pandemic offers a unique opportunity to accelerate the implementation, a change that will see that businesses' ultimate beneficiaries become the community as a whole. Businesses, small or large, can play a role in making the change at their level. It's my greatest hope that post-pandemic, more companies will set out with the intention of bringing profit and purpose together. And that's the approach of my company, Yolele, a small business with a huge potential for profit and impact. Yolele, sorry, you want to say something?
No, let's go.
Okay, Yolele is an African food company with a mission to bring economic opportunities to small farmers in Africa by opening market for their underutilized crops. These farmers are living in among the poorest communities in the world. Our first ingredient is an ancient grain called fonio. Fonio grows in a vast and arid area called the Sahel that stretches from Senegal all the way to the Indian Ocean. It is very nutritious and is gluten-free and drought-resistant. It cooks in 5 minutes and is quite versatile. It can be turned into pasta, salads, porridge, flour, or just as a side grain. It really checks all the boxes. Great for you, great for the environment, delicious, and quick cooking. As a chef, I saw an opportunity to turn this grain into a world-class crop. Fonio farmers are subsistence farmers with no access to market. Our business model is to buy fonio from these small farmers at a fair price and package it under the Yolele brand for global distribution. We partnered with Pentagram, the world's best boutique branding company, to come up with a beautiful, contemporary, and culturally significant design. We have started distributing fonio in the US since 2017. We first started with one Whole Food supermarket in Harlem near my restaurant. The demand kept growing, and today we are distributed all across the USA in over 1,000 supermarkets, including all the Whole Foods. We have a strong online distribution network. In the midst of the pandemic, we have launched new fonio products, such as a line of pilafs inspired by the culinary tradition of West Africa, including jollof fonio, yassa fonio, dawa dawa afrofunk, moringa greens, and Dakar curry. We have just launched our fonio flour, and we are getting ready to enter the snack category with our new line of 4 flavors of fonio chips. Post-pandemic, we intend to continue solidifying our supply chain with meaningful partnerships with local West African operators. We are working with our partner in Mali and a network of 30,000 and more small family farmers to create a traceable supply chain of fonio. With the same operator, we are building a state-of-the-art processing mill that will process fonio in a more efficient way with GFSI standard at a capacity of 3 tons per hour. Current processing is still partly manual and approximately at 1 ton per day. This level of production will allow us to reach a much larger market at a more affordable price. It's important for us to reintroduce the grain to the African market as well as the rest of the world. Building food processing infrastructure in Africa contributes to dismantle a history of colonization and says we should be looking to traditional crops to figure out how to feed ourselves as the climate changes. The mill will remove the current processing bottleneck and give us the capacity to also target such multinational companies like Unilever, Nestle, or Kellogg, who presently don't have access to sustainable fonio, but are also looking to contribute in making an impact. So this is really what I wanted to say about what Yolele is doing. And us and other companies like us, I think when it comes to the challenge of zero hunger, we must realize that the future of food is in Africa.
Pierre, sorry, you finish.
Go ahead.
Pierre, let me just pick one thread out. What I love about the fonio story, which you've related to me, is it's been there for 5,000 years, very much in West Africa, Senegal, and a few countries around there. And it was known as the lazy farmer's crop because it's so fertile. Is that correct? But what I love about the story is another example. We've had Kenya connected to Brazil, and we've got Senegal connected through value chains and delivering fair value on the ground back to the farmers. And I think it's another wonderful example of the type of thing we need to, replicate and scale. So Pierre, I'll give you another 30 seconds, and I have to put my hands up to everybody now. We're going to overrun by about 15 minutes. If we could all take a deep breath and understand that that's going to happen, and you can stay with us without causing too much grief, that will let us finish a 9-month process and deliver in a relaxed way. So Pierre, for you to finish very briefly, and then I will do a little bit of housekeeping, and then we'll move on. So Pierre.
Okay, and why the future of food is in Africa is because the continent has 60% of the world's arable land. And instead of going with the world system, the current world food system that's limiting our global diet, we need to look into the variety of crops that are more sustainable and nutritious. And this is what Africa has. And we can turn Africa into a net exporter of food instead of a net importer. And that's how we will feed this growing global population. I was delighted to hear Ms. Kazan say that earlier. If we are going to change the food system, we need to really focus not just on food security, but on independence, which comes with economic growth and social growth. And we are offering a path to entrepreneurship to those farmers by bringing market to them.
So I'm going to finish, Pierre, with, we just had a message on the message board. Please provide link to this new grain. So we'll pass that message on in terms of the person who's asked for that. Now, we're looking to shortly finish panel 2. We then have 2 special guests for an interview with myself. First, Anne Simpson, who I see. Welcome, Anne. We're glad to have you. And Julia in Berlin. We'll come to that. So as I say, we're going to overrun by 15 minutes, but let's finish in some style. And I'm delighted that Angela Bai, the General Secretary of the China Alliance of Social Value Investment, CASVI. Now, I think you're based in Shenzhen, or are you in Beijing? I'm not sure. Shenzhen.
Shenzhen.
Okay, Shenzhen. Okay. So, Angela, delighted. The floor is yours. And then to the respondent, Gordon Noble, before we go to the special guests, and then look to close. Angela.
Yeah, thank you very much, Paul. You can hear me clearly, right?
Very clearly, yeah.
Yes, thank you very much. Please wave to stop me if I overran, okay? I'm too much talking. It's really great to hear the different perspectives with the same topic, and I also feel very inspired. It's by those insights as well as the case. You know, the CASVI is NGO registered in China, but very inclusive because we got members home and abroad. And we focus on to promote the SDG aligned investment. So just now, Paul mentioned about the metaphor about jigsaw puzzle. I love it very much. So it's because this is a, you know, not only one system we're gonna fight. It's many systems and the super complex. So the CASVI's mission is try to find the landing point. You know, it's to build up a real case and then put all of the stakeholders together, eventually to channel capital to support those SDG aligned business. So what we have done over the past 6 years, back in 2016, we built these measurement tools aligned with around 500 pro bono experts, and also benchmarked against the international, you know, methodologies. And then the following years, we, you know, put together you know, the group of people, around 80 people, and do the data cleansing and collecting for those top 300 listed companies in China. And then, you know, it's we launched this we called Sustainable Value Top 99, according to their performance for their contribution to economic, social, and environmental. You know, all of the indexes aligned with SDGs. And then, you know, it's 2018, so we did this 3 years back testing, and also plus the 3 years real testing, we got a 6 years figure. And then we bring this result to those institutional investors as well as those mutual funds to say, see, you know, it's this, you know, the whole, you know, testing told us the financial returns for those ESG based and SDG oriented, those you know, big companies, their stock financial returns, it's just outperform all of the other major, you know, index in China. So see what they mean. It's previously thought it's financially those SDG aligned investments are not financially paid off, but the reality is you're wrong. You know, they are very much correlation, has a positive correlation. So then, you know, those top mutual funds, they started to look at, gave the attention. We got, you know, it's the three and top three, the mutual funds approached to see, would you like, you know, build up? It's, you know, it's a co-develop, it's a ETF, exchange traded fund together. Yeah, then eventually we selected the Bosara. It's a third largest mutual fund. But, you know, the reason we selected because they are the largest contractor or, you know, the assets manager for pension fund in China. The pension fund is really important, just now as Alex, I remember she said, it's really, really important. So it's 2019, and so we launched this stock index in Shanghai Stock Exchange. We call it China Sustainable Development 100 Index. And then, you know, it's the February of last year, you know, it's on the high time of the COVID-19 in China. We launched this stock index pack ETF. It's an exchange traded fund. So in total, there was 18 big institutional investors, you know, joined this IPO, including of 7 big banks, 6, the top 6 insurance companies, and also, one institutional investor from Wall Street. Very interesting. And also, one foundation is NGO in China also joined this IPO investment. It's the initial size. It's not as much as we expected. It's only 250 billion US dollar. This million US dollar, but that's good enough as a breakthrough. That's the landing point we try to find in this whole jigsaw puzzle, because we need to let them know there is a real case and who can have the closed loop, bring those all kinds of the thoughts, down to the ground to say, and then those, as long as we have this ETF fund and also stock index, all of those listed companies, start to look at us to see why, the company A is on your list, but no, we are not. What did they do? And then they started to see, oh, they already disclosed their non-financial, report, CRS or sustainable reports. And then they saw, oh, because they really care about the supply chain. And also they did, give the contributions, for this carbon reduction, something like that. So that's why they started to say, we have to care because our investors care. And those investors said, we have to care because regulators really strongly back up this initiative. So that's why we try to find, and we bring all of the, the different ideas and different stakeholders back to one real case to see, we can make it happen. We can make it.
Angela, let me make a quick link there, which everyone will relate to. So what you're saying, because the investors are giving the signal, the institutions are changing. Now I link that to Paul Watchman. The clients are giving the signals and the lawyers are changing. And we've got many examples of like that around the conversation. So again, that helps us with those jigsaw puzzles. But back to you to maybe finish in a minute or two, and then we'll move on to the interviews. But thank you for the insight. And I've had many visits over the years to the Shanghai Stock Exchange and done the Bund, but my favorite place is definitely Shenzhen, because the Shenzhen Development Bank do the best coffee.
I agree with you.
Best
my favorite.
Angela,
yes.
For you to finish.
Yes, just long and short, they're gonna close up. It's that's why the CASB is the one. It's NGOs who put all of the things together, but we really would like to make it very transparent and also inclusive, and we highly need to make the management tools we are working on aligned with the global ones. So all of the institutions on the line, please, if you are interested in the explore the China market, please contact us. And also, if there is, I know that there are a lot of working communities or committees, on this global aligned standards, for this GAAP, build up the GAAP or the other information disclosure standard, something like that. If you would like to include the China's, presence, also please contact us.
Angela,
back to you, Paul.
No, thank you very much indeed for the presentation from CASB. Greatly appreciated. So we go forward, and I'm going to ask Gordon Noble, the respondent, whether you're comfortable. Let me do the special guest interviews with Ann Simpson from CalPERS and Julia. Then I will ask you to bridge briefly, and Gordon, it's early in Australia, so thank you, to the closing comments. And in that way, we can bring it in within 15 minutes late. So I appreciate people's patience. But Anne, you are there, and let me bridge and do this way. We're changing the pace. So the old journalist in me is coming out a little bit, and I'm going to interview, first of all, an executive from one of the largest asset managers, asset owners in the world, CalPERS, in terms of the take and where we are. And then we'll move to Julia Prefetta Johansson in Berlin, who is in an interesting, really interesting startup fund manager. So Anne, are you with us? I see you're on mute. Hi.
Hello, Paul. Hello, everybody.
Hi, Anne Simpson. So listen, you're not presenting, you and me are chatting. And Anne corrected me quite right when I said it would be good to do a fireside chat. Now, Anne is in California, and you quite rightly said you're not going to do a fireside chat early in the morning. So I don't know what this is, but maybe it's a sort of it's a breakfast. And look, we've known each other for a long time, and you've been with CalPERS, as I say, one of the largest, and I mean really in terms of standards and pushing the sustainability issues forward, one of the leading asset owners in the world. That's clear in so many different ways. So what we've had over the past 8 months, complexity of capital markets. How do you connect them to the last mile? How do you reorient all those systems, the accounting systems, the legal systems, to get standardization? Dr. James Zan at UNCTAD, how do we take legacy trade agreements and put the SDGs into them? It's great complexity, but asset owners hold a very special position. You're both at 100,000 feet, but you also have to be on the ground and understanding what the investments are and about. Where do you think we are, given the pandemic, given the signals? Do you think that the asset owners are doing enough? Can we prod the system, the investment system more? Are the investment consultants doing enough? And go for it. I'll stop talking.
Well, thank you for posing that hugely important question, Paul. So first of all, where are we? We are absolutely at a transformation of the global economy. And that's in part being driven by investors like CalPERS understanding, what science taught us, over many years, which is there are planetary boundaries. And the one obviously on people's mind is global warming. There are boundaries to what the atmosphere and the oceans and natural carbon sinks can absorb, but that's one of 9. We're looking at, fresh water, nitrogen runoff, the impact of, mimicry in artificial hormones that are going in and affecting the natural world. But also, it's not just the planetary boundaries, it's the boundaries of human decency. And, when CalPERS first started thinking about these issues, to develop a strategic plan for our total fund, that means our public investments, our private investments, our debt, our equity, what we invest ourselves, what we contract out to fund managers. And the way we framed this, Paul, was acknowledging that there are 3 forms of capital for which we are stewards. And one is financial capital. That's the day job of an investor. Everybody who signed up for their CPA and their CFA and all that good stuff, financial capital, that needs to be aligned. The second is human capital. And this pandemic has shown us with brutal clarity the importance of taking care of and understanding what's happening with people, workers, communities, and right through the supply chain. And I want to highlight that despite it all, there was some very important work done by CalPERS and others at the SEC last year through the Investor Advisory Committee. And we argued for a framework for human capital management reporting in the United States before the pandemic began. And of course, once the pandemic hit, even the chair who's just left, Claire Chaitin, said, the condition of workers and communities and the impact of this pandemic is of interest, of vital interest to investors. So the recognition of the importance of human capital alongside financial capital is now at the center of the debate. And you see the new administration saying 4 priorities: COVID, the economy, climate change, and racial justice. So this isn't designed around the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, but if you had to sum up the 17 into 4, you'd capture an enormous amount of what's needed. So I think we've got new momentum and new energy from the United States. And then, of course, the third form of capital is physical. And this includes, obviously, your kit and caboodle on the balance sheet, but also natural capital. So I think it's very important, Paul, that in a way we say ESG was a phase, it's an acronym, but it doesn't actually get to the heart of sustainability. And the idea which drives this work is an understanding that we are the trustees for the common wealth, the savings of ordinary working people all around the world. This is what powers the financial system. And that finance typically has a social purpose. If you're a pension fund like CalPERS, you know, the biggest pension fund, as you say, Paul, one of the biggest top 10 in the world. But at the end of the day, we're investing to take care of people. Our fiduciary duty is the fancy word for making sure we're taking care of other people's money to pay for their pensions in retirement. CalPERS is also the second biggest purchaser of healthcare in the United States. So when we're looking at our purpose, we know full well it's about providing retirement and health benefits for 2 million people. But we're only going to get that social good taken care of if we're able to harvest economic returns sustainably. And that means building out the opportunity side, where we're finding now, Paul, we just produced a very detailed assessment on our climate change strategy. And we found that although we're talking a lot about the doom, the gloom, the risk and what needs to be done, there's also a huge opportunity. And we now have around $15 billion, about 20% of our private assets in what you might call climate solutions. So this is a transformational moment, Paul, and the financial sector has an enormously important role to play.
Let me ask you as a last question, and we thank you for coming on, at the start of your day. So I sort of see it as the $1 trillion question, and it's one of my obsessive questions over the years, which is, if you look at systemic risk, okay, the global financial crash, 2007, 2008, it was a financial risk. There's lots of complexity built in there, but the largest asset owners did own huge amounts of paper of financial institutions who made some questionable decisions, right? And it's not a casting blame. That's one type of risk. The pandemic, just take the UK. Since 2015, pandemic was the number one risk item, 2015, number one risk item on the UK cabinet risk register year after year, okay? We know the climate change story, but that ability for long-term asset owners protecting and growing, or at least protecting assets over many decades, their ability to look at systemic risk, it could be social volatility caused by food issues around the pandemic, that basket of how on earth do we have the smarts to look ahead at those systemic risks as asset owners and pick them more effectively? Because, what's run through the 8 months of the conversation here, and you've heard it many times, is that, we have to look after the long term at the same time as existing in the short term. So what is changing in the asset owner community? Is the PRI enough? Are all the different acronyms and initiatives enough? Or are they just a contribution?
Well, Paul, what you've just talked about, which is surviving, functioning in the short term in order to be part of the long term, you're describing the day job of a pension fund. So for CalPERS, we have to produce $25 billion in cash every year. 55 cents of every dollar we pay out comes from investments. And that's every month. That's paying the rent. That's putting food on the table, taking care of families. So we have to do that part. However, we've also got to acknowledge that we're not just a long-term investor, we're permanent. You look at, what Mark Carney calls the tragedy of the horizon. This is created by us not ensuring that the long-term liabilities in the system, pensions, health, mortgages, are translated into management mandates and contracts which are aligned. So the investor governance, how the whole chain of the financial services industry becomes aligned, to me is the next big thing that needs to be addressed if we're going to really deliver. The other thing I want to mention is that, the financial crisis is terrible. I mean, CalPERS for, just over 10 years, and there have been 2 global crises. And I came just after the, joining CalPERS in the wreckage of the 08-09. That is what prompted us into a rethink about how markets work. Markets are efficient until they're not. Diversification is a marvelous thing, and they say it's the only free lunch until it's not. Because when you own a piece of a systemic risk, diversification isn't going to help you. We can't all hop on a rocket and pop to Mars to find another place to diversify. So it's understanding that the only way we overcome the tragedy of the horizon is bringing financial services back into service to the real economy, which in turn needs to be in service to society. So that's one thing, the tragedy of the horizon and how we tackle that. That's in the hands of asset owners. Two, the tragedy of the commons. We all own a little piece of the risk and don't have enough of the economics in order to solve it, all the influence, all the power. How do we overcome that? We overcome that by forming alliances. And on that, I have to say, CalPERS, looking at the systemic risk of climate change, we found that just 100 companies were responsible in our portfolio for about 85% of the emissions. And it's a lot. Those 100 companies, if you are the third largest source of emissions on the planet. Number one, China. Number two, the United States. Number three, guess what? 100 companies. So that insight made us understand we had a tragedy of the commons. You've got the financial markets owning a teeny little piece of each one. So that led to the CalPERS convening and then being a co-founder of Climate Action 100+. Here's the good news. We now have over $50 trillion in signatories signed up for the goals of driving emissions to net zero in that group of companies. And these are the toughest sectors. We're talking about cement, steel, agriculture, not just oil, gas, and utilities, which get all the attention. With that in mind, we're about 3 years in, barely, we have 50 of those companies with net zero commitments. Why? Because money talks. But we also need to remember who the money belongs to and for whom it is being invested. And that's the sort of missing piece on the sustainability agenda, I think. It's the common one.
And what started as a breakfast chat, I would love it to become a fireside chat because we could go on. But thank you for joining us. If you can stay for the next 10 minutes, that would be wonderful. And I'm going to shift over to Anne Simpson from CalPERS. Thank you very much indeed. Really appreciate
Thanks,
that.
everybody.
And I'm now going to shift across to, forgive me, my eyes have gone.
Julia.
Terrible, isn't it? Julia Profeta Johansson from, I guess, Sao Paulo, originally now based in Berlin, who's a co-founder and CEO of Reimagine in Berlin, and part of the investment chain, a very different beast to CalPERS, but a VC that I guess embeds sustainability. Tell us, first of all, give us a few words on Reimagine, and then let me throw a question at you.
Lovely. Thank you so much for having me, Paul. It's really inspiring and a pleasure to be listening to all of you, great thinkers and really committed to the same objectives. And essentially, Reimagine is actually a B2B bank. So we want to really question the whole financial system and financial incentives, because we think that this is truly at the core of all the issues we're seeing around. So we can't replicate the way business has been done for the past 100 years or so. And essentially the way we want to do is really bridging this gap between the whole impact dimension. And I think here Future Fit Business and some others were talking about bringing down to reality what all ESG ratings and impact measurements, etc. mean, and bridging this to the mainstream. And our focus is really to bring this to the startups and to the ones that are innovating at the I won't say the last mile here, but really on the ground, and are really creating the technologies that are going to shape the future. And then really making this more accessible for them to understand that they also can go into this journey, even if they haven't been born as an impact company right at the beginning. So for us, it's a lot about mainstreaming impact and making it accessible through creating different kind of financial incentive structures, because at the end of the day, as Aim said, money talks, right? So whenever you're sitting on top of money, you have also the responsibility of passing onwards what is truly your mission and how is it that you can incentivize more companies to achieve impact at scale.
So Julia, as I understand it, you were an investment banker, and you were then an entrepreneur, and you're an entrepreneur again now. But it strikes me you've come on a journey where you understand the system, but you've got a motivation to disrupt it because of the tech evolution, because of values. Is that correct? You want to disrupt, and you do think it's open for disruption?
Yeah, that's a good point. I think when you say it like that, yes, it's really like I'm trying to disrupt a lot of what I've seen from inside. So coming from banking, working for like big tech companies as well, and then like just understanding that the way capital has been like deployed and tech has been developed is just like off the beat with like my own personal values and what we have, for instance, with the SDGs as such a great framework to really like redirect efforts. So what we're trying to do is really like use the system against itself. So we're starting small, but with great ambitions to really be like this bothering little like piece in the system that is like changing the way we think about like giving credit to companies, the way we create, you know, like financial services for these like smaller companies that eventually are going to become the big ones, really like shaping what's going to really look like in the future.
So you're effectively a jujitsu fund manager using the force of the system against itself. I quite like that.
Yeah, why not?
Yeah, okay. I'm copywriting that right now. It might exist, but there you go. So look,
Lovely.
Julia, the time is shorter than it should have been, but we really appreciate you staying on. The same with Ann Simpson. The panels are finished. In some ways, that's 99.9% of an 8-month dialogue. We've got almost 8 months of, well, we've got over 8 hours of video of the discussions. We're turning that into the Waterberg Declaration, which will be open for consultation on Monday. We'll open that for 2 months. We'd hope people will come on, help us shape it. Some people sign it, then we take it to the World Investment Forum. So the closing, I'm going to go, our respondents are all called Noble. Alexandra Noble, thank you for your comments. I'm going to go to the relentless, tenacious Gordon Noble, who's actually the Blended Capital Group partner in Melbourne, Australia. It must be the early hours, Gordon, but pass the flame to Paul Watchman and then Mervyn King, Professor Watchman and Judge Professor King to close the process. Gordon, your wisdom in a few minutes and then we'll close. But thank you to all before we close it. Gordon.
Thanks, Paul. Look, I'll take a couple of minutes. It's 4 a.m. here in Melbourne. It feels a little bit like if we ever fly from Australia overseas, you feel like that when it's the middle of the night. You know, we tend to fly 20 hours to get anywhere in the world. Look, I want to focus on, I guess, the theme in the last panels has been really around entrepreneurship at the if you like the last mile communities. And I want to pick up, Paul, your comment about the jigsaw puzzle. And the point I'd make, if you're sitting, you can just imagine yourself, you're sitting with that 6-year-old and you're doing the jigsaw puzzle. And how many times when people do a jigsaw puzzle, just is one piece missing and everyone's looking around and you just can't find it. And then you find out that someone sat on it. It's sitting in the chair somewhere and it's been there the whole time. And I think there's a missing piece as part of our conversation. And I want to go back to Dr. Zan's comments at the start in terms of the channel that we need to the SDGs. And the observation I'd make is around the infrastructure that we have to facilitate trade, which is obviously a big part of the role of UNCTAD. The infrastructure that facilitates trade is essentially ports and airports. And the infrastructure that facilitates money is effectively stock exchanges. So if we look at the comparison between those two, when you look at airports and ports, what you see is that every country has at least one major airport, at least one major port, in many cases more. When you look at stock exchanges, we have a different model that operates. And in fact, what you start to see is the incentive is not to distribute that infrastructure to make sure that every country has an active stock exchange, but that the money all flows to deeper and deeper pools. And that's not an accident. That's modern portfolio theory. That's the way modern portfolio theory works. So we've talked a lot about the need to build those sustainability frameworks and to get the reporting right for those markets that exist. I think that missing piece is to talk about how do we make those markets that don't exist. We've got 32 trillion of OECD pension fund money alone, and we've got sovereign wealth funds around the world. Every new dollar that comes into the system goes into those those deep pools. It gets channeled into the deep stock exchanges around the world. It doesn't go to less developed countries' stock exchanges. We know the stock exchanges exist. You know, we know the World Federation of Exchanges, the number of exchanges around the world, but many of them don't have the liquidity. Many of them don't have what investors would be looking for to invest. And so much of that $32 trillion sitting in OECD pension funds won't flow and will never flow unless we find that mechanism to address it. And I think the Sustainable Stock Exchanges initiative is absolutely key in this regard. So I just point that I think that's a missing piece. I think the words that Dr. Zan used in terms of multi-stakeholder partnership, absolutely key here. And I think if we're going to create that pathway for that entrepreneur in a country, stock exchanges are going to be critical. So I just put that as my sort of reflection on the piece of work that needs to be focused on in the future. And it is this missing piece, I think, that we need to take forward. So I'll leave my comments there, Paul.
Look, genuine thanks to both the Nobles, Alexandra and Gordon, for consuming such amount of information and experience and coming back. Please give me your notes, because that will help with the declaration. Now we really are coming to closing. So I'm going to say our thanks to Dr. James Zan from UNCTAD, Anthony Miller and the UNCTAD World Investment Forum team. We look forward to continuing the journey, and we'll deliver a declaration to you in a couple of months, which captures the 8 months and 8 hours of dedicated conversation. So thank you, Dr. Zan, on behalf of all of us and the United Nations.
Oh, could you give the floor to Anthony to say a few words on behalf of UNCTAD?
I
Thank
will.
you.
Anthony, then to Paul Watchman, then to Professor King, and then we're closed. So thank you, Dr. Zan. Anthony.
Thanks, Paul. I'll be very brief. I'd just like to thank you, Paul, for the excellent moderation. Even though we've run over, it's a Herculean task to go through so many excellent experts today, but really draw out the key points. And we really appreciate that, both in this session and the one we had earlier today. And also to congratulate you on this 8-month process you've been working on. And we, of course, look forward to continuing to work with you on that. And just to say that we appreciate the kind of multi-stakeholder dialogue today, looking at different facets of investment for sustainable development. This is indeed the purpose, the DNA, if you will, of UNCTAD's World Investment Forum. It's meant to bring together these kinds of conversations. And so we certainly appreciate everybody who participated today, and we look forward to doing our part to help facilitate and carry this conversation forward. Thank you, Paul.
Anthony, thank you for all your help, and Dr. Zan as well, and the UNCTAD team. Over to Professor Paul Watchman. You've been with us from the start. You're here at the end, and we'll keep going. So, Paul, some Scottish wisdom.
I'll be brief. I've got 2 quotes I'd like to begin with. One is from Melinda Gates, where she says that the pandemic has magnified everything, for everything that's wrong with society, from systemic racism to gender equality and poverty. And another quote also about the pandemic is from Mike Ryan, an epidemiologist with the WHO organization. He said, be fast, have no regrets. If you need to be right before you will move, you will never win. So I think the interesting thing about the pandemic and climate change, it's brought us a step forward more rapidly than we would have been before. And we stress again the need for urgency and cooperation. And we are starting to see that cooperation across government, across businesses, across financial institutions. But our big problem seems to me, from having listened to these talks from during the whole period, is getting the investment to the right place, to make sure there are mechanisms, make sure that there's structures that can develop agriculture in Africa, as Mike is doing and others are doing, who can develop the food product that one needs to have. And I think that we should be talking not only generally at government level, but actually to drill down and to look at the role of how intermediaries can push this forward in a meaningful sense, because they are not living in a vacuum. What applies generally in society and the values that are starting to emerge And I do think the crisis has brought about a re-evaluation of business and investment and the purpose of society. And I think that's going to be reflected in institutions in a way in which it hasn't done perhaps since about 1945 or 44, when they first established the United Nations. And that was what I think when Churchill said, don't waste a crisis, that was to enable them to form the United Nations. So some crises bring out good things. So I'll just leave it there. Thank you very much.
Professor Watchman, with real thanks. Two very, very quick comments. I've said earlier in the week that I always felt that the World Health Organization should be funded like the world's most excessive hedge fund. It should have every resource imaginable because it is dealing with the risk, the systemic risk, and we've seen the impact of it. It was never funded as such, but perhaps it should be. And I thank you for those comments and your leadership through this process. And to Judge Professor King to close. Mervyn, the floor is yours to end this process, and then the declaration shaping begins.
Thank you. I start with a quotation as well from that famous blind woman, Helen Keller, who said there's something worse than being blind, and that is having sight and no vision. What is it we see? We see that the 20th century was a century of unsustainable development. We know that we had used individually, but in the main, companies had used natural assets faster than nature was regenerating them. And erroneously, corporate leaders focused on the primacy of the shareholder. And now the world has realized that that was a model that actually has caused harm where bottom lines are being subsidized by society and the environment. So what is the vision? The vision now is to take account of the needs, interests, and expectations, and now with the pandemic, the hardships of stakeholders of a company. And for a board to have in the short term a compromising mindset to make sure of the survival of companies during what I've said is coronanomics, because we have two crises. We have an economic crisis plus a viral crisis. And we shouldn't think of them as separate things. These are crises in which companies are swimming. And directors, in applying their mind in the best interest of the company, have to deal with that. So long-term, Paul, I think what has happened in the corporate reporting world, with which I happen to be involved, the statement of intent of the 5 framework providers to try and harmonize the standards, the consultation paper of the IFRS, and the hopeful establishment of an international sustainability standards board, which would make Anne's life, for example, much easier, because you'd have comparability before you invest in the equity of a company, which has got rigor and is standardized. And I think we will get there in the next 2 years. I'm hopeful of it. And certainly the merger of SASB and the IRC, which I happen to be involved, I think is going to be critical. And the formation of the Value Reporting Foundation is critical, because in the end result, information is critical to get back to people like Anne, to Sean, to make business judgment calls and decisions. Further, I just want to say this, that it's only a matter of time between the front page of the Financial Times and the New York Times. A famous pension fund or a famous corporation's directors are going to be sued for a failure of duty of care if they haven't taken account of the material and pertinent ESG issues of a company, an investee company, and have invested the beneficiary's money of a pension fund in the equity of that company, or have invested the shareholders' funds in a company, in the equity of that company, and haven't done an ESG audit of how that company's dealt with environmental, social, and governance issues. It will be a failure of duty of care, in my judgment, on behalf of directors and trustees of pension funds. We need one case of one well-known financial institution or well-known pension fund to be on the front page of the Financial Times and the New York Times, the Economist, and the Wall Street Journal. And we will maybe then reach and achieve the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030. Thank you, Paul.
Mervyn, with thanks, one last thank you to Michael Murray of the Blended Capital Group. This process simply would not have happened without Michael's hard work over the past 9 months. And with that, again, thank you to all of you. I would also say, I would hope that, I've repeated it from this morning, but the human element of this conversation and the positive energy, I would hope was seen as a gesture of condolence and respect to the 2 million plus people who've lost their lives through the pandemic. We can't forget that, and the impact on families and communities. So with that, positive ahead, declaration, and we'll put this pandemic behind us, but we have to rebuild better. Thank you everybody for participating with such patience. Azumi-san, thank you for being in Tokyo, Gordon in Australia, and for your support over the last 8 months. And Dr. Zan, we will be back. We will give you a declaration, and it will have recommendations for positive action and meaningful action. Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.
Thank you very
so
much, Paul, for your leadership. Thank
Bye.
you. Looking forward to your declaration.
Yeah.
Thanks,
The
Paul.
Waterberg
Thank you.
Declaration. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye-bye, everyone. Thank you. Thanks, Anthony.
Good night.
Thanks, Ambassador. Cheers, Paul.
Thank you, everyone.